Hello, my name is Julie, and it's time to talk about what I read in June. June was an off month for me. I graduated college in May. My job doesn't start till July, so I had not a lot of things to do except do book content and read books. And now my life is about to pick up again because I'm in the middle of a move. I have a 4-hour drive to do today. I have so many things going on. So I am going to try to talk about the 13 books that I read in as short a time as possible. So let's do my stats first. This is my spreadsheet generated graphic. I read 13 books for a total of 4,760 pages. I had an average rating of 3.79, which is above average. I had 2 5 stars, fantastic. I had an average page count of 366. I read 158 pages a day, and when it comes to my TBR, I read 4 from my shelf, but added 4 to my shelf. Over the course of the year, I am still at net 5 books added to the TBR, which is a number I'm happy with. I'm about on par for books and pages read over the last 3 years. I read an average number of fantasy, but I read more general fiction than normal. Lots of 4 stars, a pretty average bell curve there. Read lots of library books. This might be the last time I have so many library books on here, but it's okay. I'm gonna try not to be extremely damaged by that. But let's go straight into the book. The first book that I read this month was Severance by Ling Ma. This was my book club pick of the month. This quarter we were reading dystopian fiction, and this was the one that the club voted on. This is a very interesting take on pandemic, post-apocalyptic zombie narratives. So we follow our main character, Candace, who works in publishing, but in a really boring sector that she didn't want to be in the first place. A pandemic hits and she just sort of ignores it and tries to keep up with work when nobody's even in the office. So that's one half of our narrative, is seeing the pandemic begin and her life before it. And then the other half is she has met up with a group of people who are surviving together, and there is a very interesting leader called Bob who is trying to lead them to a perfect place for them to stay. This is a really interesting take on zombies because the zombies don't hurt anybody. They don't go after you. All they do is repeat cyclical things that they did in their life. For example, there is a family that keeps setting the table for dinner over and over again. So this is a commentary on capitalism and how that drives lives into being cyclical and repetitive, and also on nostalgia. There's enough open-ended questions that are really great for discussion, but there is a definitive beginning, middle, end of the book that I feel like people who don't love open-ended books will still be satisfied. I really liked the writing style of this book. I think there was a lot of purpose in it. It wasn't a brand new favorite of all time, but I think this is a great example of dystopian fiction, and I'm so glad we picked it. So this was a 4-star, even higher if we're just going into quality. Then we have The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. This was like one of my most anticipated releases of last year, and then I have been putting it off for forever. I had pre-ordered it. My copy is signed and personalized, which is the first time I've ever had a book personalized. Thank you, Ashley. This is about our main character, Shay Evans, who is now a housewife, and she's trying to get away from her dark past in college. She doesn't tell anybody what happened to her in the past and is trying to put it behind her. One of her childhood best friends runs a true crime podcast, and he has recently reported that her college roommate has just died. It looks like a suicide, but Shay does not believe that it is a suicide because it is the exact same way that their other college roommate also took her own life. She believes that this has to do with what the 3 of them were involved in college, and how the 3 of them were hurt, and that those bad people are trying to get them again. I'm being a little vaguer than I was in the past because I think maybe not knowing everything might be fun, but this does have a lot of triggering content. This book actually has a content warning page at the beginning of it, so definitely do read that. But this was absolutely fantastic. This is very different from In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. They are very different in tone and have different purposes. I think they have main characters that are similar enough. As much as I loved both of them, some people have loved one and hated the other, that sort of thing, but I adored this. I think that this was very purposefully done in what Winstead wanted to say about gender essentialism and power dynamics between gender and the patriarchy and all that sort of thing, how that can lead to violence that goes unchecked. I liked that we have the investigative portion of this, where we have Shay and her childhood best friend are investigating these people, also in the form of a transcript between the two of them recording for the podcast. We have Shay telling the story of what happened to her back in college. It is a rough read to get through those parts, and I think that Shay is not always the character that you root for. She makes some decisions that are questionable, but you understand her so thoroughly by what she has been through, and I adored that. I am not a person who needs to love a character, every single one of their decisions. I just want an interesting character that you understand fully. And I think this did that so well. This was the highlight of my day to pick up, and I could not put it down when I did. As long as the content is not going to trigger you, I think that this is a fantastic read. Then for my 12 books from 12 friends in 12 months challenge, that's always hard to remember, I read Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat. This was a fantasy that I didn't really know anything about beforehand, but it is a YA historical fantasy, first in a series, that has to do with magical forces returning to the world. So there was a dark king and his forces hundreds or thousands of years ago when magic was in the world, and there were also good forces and prophesized heroes, and that battle happened a long time ago. And now we're in the 1800s in London. There's no magic, but these heroes and villains are being reincarnated. So we have our main character, his mother has died, and he is trying to figure out who killed her, and he starts getting involved in the good forces and the bad forces of the past, finding out that magic exists, that sort of thing. You know, historical fantasy is something that I tend to love, but this really didn't do it for me. I think this had a good skeleton, but I don't think it was fully fleshed out enough. I didn't think that it necessarily needed to be like historical London. I didn't think there was a whole lot of a point to that. The good forces that our character gets involved with, I thought were kind of flat, and I didn't really get invested in a lot of our characters. One of my main critiques is that it felt like the same pieces of information were being directly told to the reader several times, where like a piece of info dump would be given and then a character would repeat it and then a different character would repeat it. So it felt like when you're watching a TV show and you come back from commercial, so they repeat the last line of dialogue so you remember what's going on. It just felt like my intelligence was being a little bit insulted. I think there was some interesting character dynamics, and the ending plot twist did surprise me, but ultimately it was not an easy book for me to get through because I was very much paying attention to, I was reading a book. I was not in the story. So I gave this like a 2.5 or a 3. It's not bad, I just didn't care for it. Then I read Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I listened to this on audiobook. This is the story of 12 different people, mostly women, mostly Black women, mostly Black British women, who are all connected in different ways. They all know each other for the most part. Some of them are relatives, and most of them are at this premiere of a play that one of the women is putting on. We follow each of these people over the course of 5 chapters where we see them from their childhood, their beginnings, like how they grew as a person, and then what they're doing today, what the biggest struggles in their lives have been. It's like a snapshot of their entire life. And then we just move on to a different person. So we get to see 12 very well-defined characters in such a short amount of time, and they're woven together to sort of juxtapose each other so you can see why all these different people are different from each other, and it gives you a better idea of each of the characters to have them put together this way. I thought this was very well constructed. I thought the audiobook was really well performed. I could tell when we were on to a new person just by the actor's attitude. There's not much of a set plot of this book, but I thought it was so well done. And it really left an impression on me. I think my favorites were Morgan, Gigi, and Dominique. Those were the ones that will stay with me for the longest. A lot of these people are queer, there's a non-binary character. We just see a wide diaspora of people. This was really great. It's a 4+, I'm gonna call it, I don't know, 4.25, whatever. Really well done. Then, after years and years, I have finally read The Kite Runner by Colette Assini. This I have had for forever. I've been hearing about it since I was a child, and I finally got around to it because I had enough people push me to do it. This is about Amir, who grew up in Afghanistan, and it describes the relationship that he had with his friend Hassan, who was also of a lower class than him. He was his father's servant's son, and so they were very close, but Amir never really treated him fairly, and how that relationship, which we see in the beginning of the book, affected the rest of Amir's life, especially in guilt. So we follow Amir over the course of many years. He's an author, and this is him telling that story. I understand why this is beloved. I think that it is popular for a reason, and it deserves it. I do also think it's a little bit of a kitchen sink drama because it takes place over so long. Every single bad thing that could happen does happen. I mean, there is the Taliban, so awful things are gonna happen, but just in the terms of it being like a family drama, it is a bit of a kitchen sink. This does a really great job of painting Afghanistan. The setting is very well done, and then showing the changes as the political structure changes, as Amir and his father leave and go to America, and then when Amir has to go back to Afghanistan and he feels a loss even more as he sees what has happened to his country because of the Taliban. I do think this is really powerful, and like the images in this book will stay with me for a long time. But I do think the personal story was very dramatic, very big. So I ended up giving this a 4-star, and I got to cross it off of my 100 epic reads of a lifetime list. Then on a very long car ride, I knocked out Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. This is her adult debut. I've read a couple of her YA novels and absolutely love them. This was one of my most anticipated books last year, and I'm only now getting to it. This is about two women, Sarah and Emily. When they're younger, they both go through struggles, and they are growing up, becoming adults, trying to find their footing. Sarah ran away from home and had a lot of trauma with the reason that she ran away and the process of trying to run away. Now she's a big shot bartender, and Emily just wasn't really sure what she wanted to do with her life. She's on her like 5th college major, and she just decides to start doing florals for her family's favorite restaurant. And the two women meet and are immediately taken with each other, but then they're separated after this one meeting. So we have our individual narratives of the two of them, and toward the end, they sort of get put back together, and it's seeing, can they stay together? This book did have a lot more to do with their individual journeys than it had to do with their relationships specifically, which I would have liked a little bit more if we're supposed to be rooting for them. I would have liked to see actually more of their interactions rather than just hearing about it. There's a lot that happens at the beginning that's like really sad, but then we see the adults that have absorbed that into their selves, that they have processed it and become new people, and they are trying to make room in their lives for more happy things to happen. But I did not find this as powerful as her other books, and I think part of that could be that this is in 3rd person. The other ones are very personal narratives that are 1st person, and this felt like we are watching something rather than being in the characters themselves. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I don't know how long this is gonna stay with me. So I'm giving this a 3-star. Then I listened to I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself by Marissa Crane. This was fantastic and such a surprise. Prisons have been abolished in America. Instead of being imprisoned, criminals or people that are just considered unsavory by the state are given a literal second shadow. Our main character, Chris, has had a second shadow for a while. You don't find out why immediately. And her wife, Bo, has wanted a kid, and so Chris goes along with it. Bo gets pregnant, and at the beginning of the book, Bo has died in childbirth. And now Chris is going to have to raise the child that her wife wanted, and especially since this child has been assigned a second shadow for killing Bo. This was very emotional. Chris is not your normal narrator. She's weird, she likes weird things, and she is racked by grief, so much so that she is not always responsible. I was just sucked into this. I was obsessed with her perspective, and I just wanted all of these characters to be okay. We don't necessarily get a huge exploration into this world. It's more of a personal narrative in this world. It's not a take down the man dystopian. I think it's much quieter than a lot of books that are considered dystopian, which I liked. And this takes place over years as Chris is trying to grow, and she is holding onto her grief so hard that it is inhibiting her. This is so good. I am so glad I read this, and this is probably my favorite 2023 release. So I highly recommend this. To who? I don't even know. I just thought it was fantastic. So this is a 4.5. It could be a 5-star if it stays in my memory for even longer. And then I was gifted an ARC by Nat Galley of Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. This is set in a fantasy world where the city that we're in, called Sanair, is inspired by the walled city of Kowloon, and our main characters are inspired by the characters of Antony and Cleopatra. We're not really following the plot, it's just the characters. Every year, the emperor, who is very corrupt, runs essentially a Hunger Games. 88 people fight to the death, and the person who wins gets whatever prize they want from the emperor. We have 2 people who have infiltrated the games this year. One of them is Anton, who is the former best friend and adopted brother of the emperor's son. And then we have Kala, who is the former princess of Air, one of the twin cities, and she, in the past, fully killed her family to topple the monarchy and then was presumed dead. But she's been alive this whole time and is now joining the games so that she can kill her uncle, the emperor. This is a really fascinating setup, and I thought that this, again, had good bones, but I don't think that it entirely filled it out. I read These Violent Delights, only the first book, and I did end up enjoying that one more than this one because I felt like this wasn't fleshed out. There are so many good things that I could say at first, and then it kind of stagnated as we went along. These characters, they don't feel like they have a backstory before this book started. It felt like everything started day one. There's so many info dumps, but I still don't feel like I have a grasp on what this world is like. I think the setting of Sanair specifically, we have a very good visual for it, but politically, if we're trying to take down the man, I don't even understand what the whole system's looking like. And these are 2 characters who should have very special knowledge of what this is like. Even though I think Kala is basically May from Avatar: The Last Airbender, so I should love her, I wasn't really attached to any of these characters. The magic system in this is that a lot of people have the ability to shift their consciousness to another person. So their chi leaves their body drops, and they go into the consciousness of another person. Very cool. Sometimes it was used in an interesting way, sometimes it was used in a predictable way. I think that will get better as the series goes on, but I don't think that I will be continuing in it because I am not invested in the characters or the world. So I'm giving this in the realm of a 2.5. Again, this just wasn't for me, and I had really high expectations as a Shakespeare fan, and someone who really enjoyed Chloe Gong's writing in the past. Then I listened to The Honeys by Ryan LaSala. This is a YA horror about a gender fluid character named Mars, whose sister used to go to this very special camp for rich people. One year she came back from it and came back entirely changed and ended up attempting to murder Mars, and she ended up dying. Everyone's chalked it up to her getting brain cancer, but something's off about it, and Mars has decided that he is going to go to the summer camp that he used to go to with his sister before he was basically bullied out of it because he's queer. This was so interesting. I really love the writing style of it. This went further into the horror than I thought a YA would, like in terms of gross factor. Like there were some scenes that were absolutely disturbing in like a very good way. Like it was very well done, and I really like a book where the horror element is bigger than where it first appears. And maybe it's not exactly the type of horror that you think it is at the very beginning. We have this group of girls called the Honeys, who are the girls that his sister got in with. So it's really interesting how these girls kind of become an entity onto themselves, and how Mars is very interested in being a part of it. And him wanting to be a part of it is also like a metaphor for him being gender fluid. So his relationship with the boys and the girls at this camp are very interesting, as there are people who accept him and there are people who very much do not, and people have a really hard time grasping that somebody doesn't want to conform to the gender binary. Oh my god. I really loved Mars as a character. I thought the audiobook narration was great, and I just had a good time with this. So I'm giving this a pretty strong 4-star, and I'm going to remember this very well. Definitely going to be recommending this to people. Then I read The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea by Maggie Takuta Hall. I wanted to get another queer book in here. And then I did find out after I read this that Maggie Takuta Hall does not consider herself queer from what I saw on the internet. So it's not necessarily own voices. I didn't think the representation was bad though. Lady Evelyn, who is a lady who has been married off by her neglectful parents who don't really care about her very much, to be married off to this stranger. So she's going on a passenger ship for like 6 months so that she can get to her husband, and she has been ripped away from the handmaiden that she was in a relationship with. So she gets on the ship where Flora, or Florian, a girl disguised as a man pirate because they don't want women on the ship. And it turns out the ship Flora is a sailor on is actually a pirate ship that takes the people who go on the ship and sells them into slavery. So when Florian, and Evelyn start hanging out and they start falling for each other, Flora's like, well, shit, I don't want to do the whole slavery thing now. Adventure ensues involving a mermaid, the witch, and the sea. I liked the mermaid element. I liked the sea element quite a bit. I liked that magic because the sea is like a goddess. The sea is a force that some people don't really acknowledge is real. I liked that this read like a fairy tale. I wasn't super loving all of the plot points. I don't know how long this will actually stay with me. I think that this read like it was for a younger audience, but the plot involves slavery and sexual assault and everything like that, and I was just like, who is this for exactly? And I thought that this was a standalone, and it turns out there's a sequel coming soon, and I have questions, like, why? I thought this was okay. I gave this like a 3-ish star. I do really love the art on this cover though. Then we've got Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. This is a mystery novel that came out a while ago, and I'm only just now getting to it because I kept seeing it at my library. So this is about this medical experimental system where essentially people are put in a place of very high pressure oxygen, and it's supposed to cure autism and all these disabilities that people have. And it's pseudoscience, but this family is running this, and this thing ends up exploding because somebody lit a cigarette near it. And there are a lot of accusations as to who did it and if it was on purpose. And we are following the trial of a woman, of one of the autistic children that was inside, as she has been accused of lighting this fire on purpose to kill her child. There's only one character that we know for a fact did not do it, and we are following all the lies that people are telling on the stand. Angie Kim is actually a lawyer, so it was interesting to see her take on a courtroom drama, and I was really engrossed in the courtroom part at the beginning. But the farther we got, less so, but I still wanted to know what happened toward the end. Honestly, the more frustrated I got with the characters, like honestly, we're not supposed to like all these people, but the amount that people are lying was just annoying to a point. The solution to it was something that I could have guessed. There were only so many choices and it felt pretty obvious to me. I like the writing style. I did really like the court proceedings. I don't know. I gave it like a 3.5. Then I read The Last True Poets of the Sea by Julia Drake. I have a vlog coming up soon. Can you guess what it's for? And this is about our main character, Violet, whose younger brother, Sam, just attempted to take his own life, and he is being sent to a facility in Vermont where he's going to be taken care of, and she is being sent off to Maine, where her family is from, and she feels like her family just wanted to get rid of her because she's a party girl, but she really needs to kind of wake up because she has been partying and everything, but she's punishing herself in the way that she is doing this. She's not a fun party girl, she's a I want to do damage to myself. So she ends up meeting this group of friends in Lyric, the town that she's from, and gets involved with trying to investigate the shipwreck that her great-great-great-grandmother escaped from. This is inspired by Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, which I have not studied. I think it had the right amount of inspiration from that. At the beginning, I was feeling like I was okay about it, but the more I went into this book, the more I was obsessed with these characters and their relationships. I loved the friendship group and the sort of love triangle that we have going on in this book. I loved that not all of the chapters were traditional narratives, so sometimes it would be a list of all the things that Violet is trying to do to ignore this problem in her life, or the letters that she's trying to write her brother, or a backstory of something that went wrong in the past, but it's written from a different perspective. This is one of those great teen story narratives that balances like fun and funny dialogue while also tackling very real issues that teenagers deal with. And I am just in love with this book. This was so good, and I'm so glad that I finally got around to it because it's been a 5-star prediction forever. And I am putting it in a 4.55. Again, if it stays with me, it will stay a 5. Please read this. It was great and queer. And then lastly, I listened to the audiobook of The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This is a fantasy that is inspired by France's occupation colonization of Northern Africa. So we have Terrain, who is a person who is from the African country. They have fantasy names, but I'm just going to use France and Africa. And she was taken as a child, and she has been a soldier of the French country, and she has been sent back to where she's from, which she hasn't been since she was a very young child, so she can help put down a rebellion. But very quickly, she is court-martialed for murder, and she is about to be killed. But then we have Luca, who is the princess of this French country. She is trying to take her rightful throne from her uncle. A lot of people don't like her because she's a woman and she's also disabled. She has bad legs, she uses a cane, and she wants to help peacefully stop this rebellion so the two countries can work together. And she ends up being at the court-martial trial of Terrain and decides, okay, I can use her to help me. And so she decides to stop the whole thing, take on Terrain as her assistant to help her with her bid for the throne and also help talk to the native population. I listened to the audiobook of this. Not sure if it was the best idea. I do think it is very well performed, but there are so much of this book is French accents. And I'm like, could we tone it down a little bit? Just a little bit to make it easier. So the relationship between Luca and Terrain is so interesting because there is that power imbalance and they are actively aware of it. and trying to navigate it. And I think there's also a really interesting element of the religion and magic in this. It kind of reminds me of the Bladed Faith of like, the French people don't believe in religion, but then the African people do believe in religion, and because of that, they pray to this god, and it actually gives them healing magic. I love healing magic. This is just a really interesting political story. It reminded me of City of Brass in that, like, there's not always a right answer for these characters, because if they do the 100% morally right thing, then things are going to be taken away and powers that be are going to snap back, that sort of thing. And it's like riding the line between what you can do and what is right. And I think that this series is going to get really interesting. So I enjoyed it. Giving it a 4-star. So those are all of the books that I read in June. I talked for too long and I need to go. So please let me know what you read in June. Best book, worst book. Let me know down below. If you've read any of these or want to read any of these, again, let me know. My link is in the description if you'd like to follow me anywhere. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one.